Shalom, shalom, brothers and sisters. Shalom, my brothers and sisters. Giving honor and praise to the Most High, the Creator and the Maker of heaven and earth. My name is Yeshaya Yisrael of the tribe of Dan, the tribe I claim, of the nation of Israel, the people I claim. This is going to address a couple of matters. One, as was spoken on this channel in a video called Old Testament Israelites Hate the Sabbath ? That's on this channel. That's the name of that video. I addressed in that particular presentation the concept that some teach, well, we can't keep law outside of the land or the Holy Land itself. There's a couple of questions, brothers and sisters, we have to ask concerning that kind of ideology, right? Because one of the things, brothers and sisters, that is attempted to state to validate that kind of stance, and we're going to read out the scriptures itself, right? It's coming out of, for instance, the book of Hosea, or Hosea, said by some, chapter 2. All right, we're going to read Hosea chapter 2, verse 10. It says this. For it says, for she did not know that it was I that gave her the corn and the wine and the oil and multiplied unto her silver and gold, which she used for Baal. Therefore I will take back my corn and the time thereof, and my wine and the season thereof, and I will snatch away my wool and my flax, given to cover her nakedness. And now I will uncover her shame in the sight of her lovers, and none shall deliver her out of my hand. I will also cause all her mirths to cease, her feasts, her new moons, her Sabbaths, and all her appointed seasons. Now the part that people are going to when it says the Most High will cause to cease her Sabbaths, her feasts, her appointed times, and her new moons, right? If we take that, brothers and sisters, who is going to do that? The Most High. Now that is in the book of Hosea, who actually was a prophet before the prophet Isaiah. And Isaiah was a prophet, brothers and sisters, before Jeremiah. So let's see what it says, for instance, in Jeremiah chapter 17, for edification purposes. All right? Jeremiah, the 17th chapter, and we're going to go, brothers and sisters, from verse 19. Thus saith the Lord, then it says, thus said the Lord unto me, go and stand in the gate of the children of the people, whereby the kings of Judah come in, and by which they go out, and in all the gates of Jerusalem, and say unto them, hear ye the word of the Lord, ye kings of Judah, and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem that enter in by these gates. Thus saith the Lord, take heed for the sake of your souls, and bring no burden on the Sabbath day, nor bring it in by the gates of Jerusalem, neither carry forth a burden out of your house on the Sabbath day, neither do ye any work, but hallow ye the Shabbat day, as I commanded your fathers. Let's stop right there in Jeremiah. Jeremiah, as stated, was a prophet after Isaiah. Isaiah was a prophet after Hosea. But you have brothers and sisters that will go to Hosea chapter 2 that says the Most High will cause to cease the Sabbaths or her Sabbaths. So now if we see 60 and more years before Jeremiah is telling the people to keep the Sabbath and how to keep the Sabbath, then we have to understand where was Hosea coming from in that particular regard. One point to make is Hosea in most cases was addressing the northern kingdom. We have to also remember that there were Israelites that were of the northern tribes that lived in the southern kingdom of Judah. That's one thing. By the time Jeremiah comes along the scene, the northern kingdom has already fallen. So now when we read in Jeremiah chapter 17 about the kings of Judah and not the people who come in, the people who came in through the gates were not only of the tribe of Judah, as we read in your own time in 1 Kings chapter 12, you'll find out that there were Israelites of the northern tribes that lived in the southern kingdom of Judah. So you had, all right, Israelites that were being told by Jeremiah to keep the Sabbath after it says that the Most High will cause it to cease. So what is Hosea talking about? It is talking about the condition of the people, brothers and sisters. When you also go by some brothers and sisters stance by going into the book of Lamentations that says the Lord is no more, that's the time that Babylon was coming into power and took Judah over. So we have to begin to perhaps understand the mind of the Israelites that is saying we can't do law because, well, according to the understanding, we're not an ability or have the ability to do judgment, such as putting to death a homosexual or an adulterer. So therefore, well, you can't do anything. That is the stance that some have, not realizing that it says the earth is full of the judgment of the Most High. Not understanding that in the book of Isaiah 61, it says the Most High loves judgment. So if you understand the word judgment, it comes from the Hebrew root word mishpat, from the root word shapat, which means to judge. So now when you go in the book of Joel, and it says that the Most High will bring the nations down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and he will enter into judgment for his people, the house of Israel. This is something we want to talk about for edification purposes. Now, let's point this out about the Sabbath, right? For instance, when we go and we read in the book of Numbers, the 28th chapter, as we've done in previous times, when it says about the 2 he lambs that are offered every Sabbath, that's not brought by each and every single Israelite. Every Israelite did not bring 2 lambs to the priest every Shabbat. Because, for instance, when you read about the unfortunate situation when 70,000 Israelites died within a particular time because of a plague that was going throughout the land, right? When you read as stated about the 70,000 Israelites that was passing away, this being in the era of King David, right? If every Israelite were, according to their understanding, as some teach, was to be responsible for bringing the 2 lambs, then you would have way over 1 million or so lambs. If every Israelite was to bring 2, that's why Numbers 28 has to be understood from Numbers chapter 18. Numbers chapter 18 explains that the priest offerings is what the people who had the ability did donate and obligate themselves to bring to the priest. Just as much as Hannah, the mother of Samuel, donated her son and made herself obligated to have to give her son to the priest. You understand? So once it came down to that particular aspect. So that's something we pointed out. Now, in a discussion that was had concerning this kind of matter, Leviticus chapter 26 was mentioned. And we want to read Leviticus 26. And I want to ask the question that I asked earlier, or that was asked earlier, because it ain't the spotlight on me. We're going to go to Leviticus chapter 26, right? And it reads kind of like Deuteronomy 28 in a certain part. And we want to start in verse 14. It says, "But if you will not hearken unto me, and will not do all these commandments, and if you shall reject my statutes, and if your soul abhor my ordinances, so that you will not do all my commandments, but break my covenant." Now let's stop there. When you find brothers and sisters talking about, well, we have to and will be obligated to do all the commandments, we, men, women, children, all of us will have to do all of the commandments. I want to read something in the law, brothers and sisters. Let's go to Leviticus chapter 15. Let's start in verse 16. Leviticus 15:16. "And if the flow of seed go out from a man, then he shall bathe all his flesh in water and be unclean until the even." A woman can't do that. It specifically says a man. When you read in Leviticus chapter 27 about the person in their obligatory matter from 60 years old and upward from 40 years old and upward, 30 years old and upward, 20 years old and upward, from a month old, and so forth. That's in Leviticus 27. The point is, for instance, when you go to Deuteronomy 17, you read about the law about the king. That does not apply, brothers and sisters, all right, to the Gadite, to the Danite. You understand? This is what we want to point out. There are laws for the king. There's laws for women. There's laws for men. There's laws for elders. There's laws for girls. There's laws for boys. There's laws for priests. The priest's daughter is not treated the same as, say, a Danite daughter or a Gadite daughter. Her role is different. You have to know where you fit in at and what your portion is. See, what happens, unfortunately, with the community that says, well, because we're not in the land, we can't do the judgments. Therefore, if you're not doing the judgments, you can't do anything whatsoever. What they fail, unfortunately, to realize is they're looking to the people in the Tanakh to validate themselves and not reading the Tanakh for what the Most High said to be validated. I want this to be pointed out. These brothers and sisters, elders, and so forth are looking at people, human beings who are dead, that were mentioned in the Tanakh to see what they did to try to role model themselves after that, as opposed to reading what the Most High is telling us to do so we can sit there and be validated. They're waiting for man and women to sit there and be their validation, to give them the heart symbol that you love, their comment on Facebook, to give them the like, to give them the LOL situation as if everything's a comedian aspect. That's what they're expecting and hoping and anticipating. But brothers and sisters, there is not one joke, correct me if I'm wrong, in the Tanakh. The only time it says the Most High laughs, correct me if I'm wrong, is that in Psalms 2, when it says he laughs at the wicked, because the wicked actually think that their plan is going to work. So now, taking all of that into consideration, we can go back, if we will, to Leviticus chapter 26, as was cited before, right? And we want to read, brothers and sisters, let's start Leviticus 26, verse 38. And ye shall perish among the nations, and the land of your enemies shall eat you up. And they that are left of you shall pine away in their iniquity in your enemies' lands, and also any iniquities of their fathers shall they pine away with them. This is why, brothers and sisters, we do not look to man, be it our ancestors and so forth, to say that must be the exact same thing that we must do. Now, that's not the level and the standard that we go by in that particular case. You understand? Because, as it says, our fathers sin and are not. In the book of Zechariah, it says, do your fathers live forever? The answer is no. It says the word of the Most High, as it says in Isaiah 40, that lives forever. So when you read Aseret Debarim, also understood as saying as the Ten Commandments, and the Sabbath is in there, brothers and sisters, if we understand that the Sinai Peninsula where the children of Israel were, all right, is also called in Ezekiel the wilderness of Egypt. And we understand that this is Egypt again by ships and where we are currently today. The same way they would have kept Shabbat then is the same way in this Egypt we can keep Shabbat for those who care to do it. See, because the question that was asked is, what is an iniquity? The answers given is iniquity is guilt, iniquity is sin, iniquity is evil. So if iniquity is sin, guilt, and evil, in Leviticus 26, verse 39 says, and they that are left of you shall pine away in their iniquity in your enemies' lands. This goes to show that our deeds are still being acted upon and recorded by the Most High. You understand? So, brothers and sisters, once it comes down to that particular aspect, right, we want to sit there and ask this. If it says our iniquities in our enemy's land, and you're saying iniquity is sin and guilt and evil, then what is the judgment to define what is sin, guilt, or evil? How do you define what is sin, guilt, or evil, brothers and sisters? Because the community on Facebook that says, oh, we can't do no law, trying to cite Lamentations, misunderstanding it, Lamentations chapter 2 saying the law is no more, then how are we, according to Leviticus, still marked for our iniquities as it says? That's a question that I need an answer to. The responses was, oh, these people think they're gods unto themselves. Oh, these people don't know when the Sabbath is, and so forth and so on. There was an extensive teaching that was done concerning the timing of the Shabbat. That can be put inside the description of this video. And brothers and sisters, that question is not going to be answered. It's going to be responded to, but you're not going to get an answer for it. Because the scriptures is not standing according to the stance that you're trying to bring out. Now let's go, as was cited earlier, right? Deuteronomy chapter 30, so we can gain some understanding. We are in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 30, right? Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 1. And it shall come to pass, when all these things are come upon thee, the blessing and the curse, which I have set before thee, and thou shalt bethink thyself among all the nations, whether the Lord thy God have driven thee, and shall return unto the Lord thy God, and hearken to his voice, according to all that I command you this day, thou and your children, with all your heart and with all your soul, that then the Lord thy God will turn thy captivity and have compassion upon thee, and will return and gather thee from all the peoples, whether the Lord thy God has scattered thee. And if any of thine that are dispersed be in the uttermost parts of heaven, from thence will the Lord thy God gather thee, and from thence will he fetch thee. And the Lord thy God will bring thee into the land which thy fathers possessed, and thou shalt possess it. And he will do thee good and multiply thee above thy fathers. And the Lord thy God will circumcise thy heart and the heart of your seed to love Yah Eloheka, the Lord thy God, with all thy heart and with all thy soul, that thou mayest live. And the Lord thy God will put all these curses upon thine enemies and on them that hate thee, which persecuted thee. And thou shalt return and hearken to the voice of Yah, and do all his commandments which I command thee this day. Brothers and sisters, the point in reading that particular aspect, right, is this. It's generally known and stated that Deuteronomy 30 is a conditional matter, and it is. If you bethink yourself and return, then the Lord will gather you from wherever you were scattered. So it is a conditional matter. You have to want to return back to the Most High. See, you can't look at the Israelites that was in Assyria, the Israelites that was in Babylon, the Israelites prior to that, who was under the Aramean persecution, under the Midianite persecution. You can't look to that and say, well, they weren't really fully living right according to all that was commanded. So therefore, there will be no reason then to have to think of Deuteronomy 30. That's the ideology that the people are coming with. This is why you can't look at the people who are not. You have to make the mark yourself. And this is why the record is still left here for us, so we can sit there and be that light. Now, in speaking of that light, keep your hand here in Deuteronomy 30, if you will. Let's go to Isaiah chapter 8, verse 20, so we can begin to see and understand for edification purposes. Because no disrespect intended, but once somebody had the ideology that every Israelite, every Shabbat brought 2 lambs, and you know good and well there's way over 1 million Israelites, certainly by the time of Solomon, somebody is not thinking. Somebody is not thinking rationally. You're not going to be able to sit there and try to show that certainly when the temple was built in the era of Solomon, that every Israelite would have been obligated every Shabbat to bring 2 lambs according to Numbers 28. You have to read that according to Numbers chapter 18. That's why the law, and he who teaches the law, as it says, his lips shall keep knowledge. Knowledge means that you know something, means that you have to study and apply and think. This is not for the LOL congregation. This is not for the LMAO congregation, brothers and sisters. This is for people who see that they need a change within themselves and want to do better. That's the Qahal that the Most High is talking about. Qahal meaning congregation. So let's go, if we will, to Isaiah chapter 8, verse 20. It says this: for instruction and for testimony, surely they will speak according to this word wherein there is no light. For instruction and for testimony. Brothers and sisters, the regular standard version says, for instruction and for testimony, if they speak not according to this, there's no light in them. The testimony is what is to be witnessed. The light, brothers and sisters, is, as it says in Proverbs chapter 6, the light is the Torah itself. We have to be that witness to give instruction that it speaks of in Isaiah chapter 8, verse 20. We can't in 2019 look to the men of Hezekiah in ancient Israel and say, well, they wasn't no living right, so there was no light in them. And well, when the people were later on in Babylon, there was a Deuteronomy 30 being practiced. So therefore, where's your witness that Deuteronomy 30 happened? We can make that happen if we return to the Most High. That's why it says some will wake up to everlasting life and some will wake up to everlasting contempt. And not to, quote, beat a dead horse. Anytime a person can have a concept that says it's not good enough that you don't commit adultery, you need to kill those who do. We got a problem. Because an adulterer is not known unless he's caught. So who is going to be the one to prove that somebody committed adultery? Most cases, such as in certain communities in Africa, where more people live closer to each other, adultery has been known because the people live in the proximity close to each other. So the slick mind, the ridiculous carnal mind, if you will, that would have the ideology, brothers and sisters, to think of that sort. I'm not married, but stay away when I do become one for my lady. Don't request her on Facebook. Don't sit there and send an inbox talking about Shalom Akwat or Shalom Akot. Don't do none of that. Because the mindset that some brothers and sisters have, and not to be sexist, a woman who might state that, that's not a Proverbs 31 woman. It says in Proverbs 31, the law of kindness is upon her tongue. A woman who understands her role doesn't sit there and say, well, you know, if you don't catch them in the adultery act, then you really can't do judgment like that in America. So therefore, there's no law. Don't marry her. Because she'll do anything because nothing can be done. There's a part, I think it's in Ecclesiastes, that says wickedness is spread because judgment is not set quickly. So even in the time of ancient Israel, when people were able to sit there and stone someone to death for doing a particular act, back then it was still being slacked on by the people. So now the other presentation that was being presented and back and forth with this kind of aspect is the portion that says, if you have a stubborn and rebellious son, it says in Deuteronomy 21 that if his parents can't deal with him, that you take him to the elders of the city and they stone that son that's rebellious to death. Question I have is, do you happen to have a stubborn and rebellious son that's worthy of death? And if you do, what part did you have in that? Because Deuteronomy 21 says, though his parents chasten him, that means the parents got to stay on that child's behind, maybe physically in one aspect and verbally and beating them in the head verbally in the other aspect. Because when the communication don't work, the other aspects might have to work when you're dealing. And I've been a child. I've gotten a spanking from my mommy. May she rest in peace. You understand what I'm saying? It helps. I'm not going to sit there in front on that or act like that doesn't. And sometimes you just need a talking to and not go get the belt, I'm going to spank you behind. That's not always the solution. You got to know when the balance is in that particular regard. You understand? So, brothers and sisters, we want to point this out for edification purposes. What I've come to learn is when you're conversing with someone online, be it YouTube, Facebook, or anything, social media, if you will, when you start seeing caps and everything like that, and people trying to tell other people what to do and so forth and so on, this ain't gonna work. Because in this book, for instance, here, the Tanakh part in the cover is very, very old, right? The only thing that's capitalized there is Lord in regards to the Most High. You understand? You see, you don't play with the Creator. You don't say, well, there's no more law. We can't really keep no commandments because we can't do any judgments. Because like Lauryn Hill said, in part of the language, she said, in quote, I seen, speaking of herself, I seen the biggest niggas on the blocks get murdered and they deserved it. Everybody knows, as pointed out in the Hood DVD, why the original 50 Cent was killed. He was wicked. Everybody knew why he got shot to death. Everybody knew why people ran up in the original 50 Cent's funeral and flipped the casket over, as been reported in the hood, streets talk. Everybody knows why that happened. Because of your deeds, my brothers and sisters. So we are marked in the lands of our enemies, in the lands of our captivity, according to our iniquities and our deeds. That's why when you find people, not to toot my family's horn, oh, I'm sorry to hear about your mother's loss. She was such a beautiful person. My mother this month makes 15 years since my mother been deceased, and people are still talking about the good she was doing in Israel. So the point, getting into all of that, brothers and sisters, your name speaks for you. We have, if you do want to go and use people in the book, you have Abraham, for instance. Says, look to Abraham, your father, to Sarah that bore you. Genesis chapter 26, verse 5 says that Abraham kept the commandments and the laws of the Most High. It wasn't Abraham just believed and then that was it, because his belief was shown in his action. And in his action is what made Genesis 26, verse 5 state what it stated. You are not just known by your, as the, not to be funny, the Christian understanding of belief. I just believe, because your belief is only known through your action. That's what your belief is known as. The things that you do is what shows people what you truly believe in. For instance, not to be funny, this book here, Hebrew is easy. It took time to put that together. Your actions and the things that you put your hands to shows where your heart is at. And where your heart is at is where your belief is. And the Hebrew word for belief is emunah, which is the same word for faith, coming from the root word aman, which means what? Brothers and sisters, the word aman means to be faithful or to believe. What you are faithful to, what you are loyal to, what you are dedicated to shows in your actions. But if you have the mindset that says, we're going to look to see what we can't do, you're never going to be able to answer why Leviticus 26, verse 39 says, your iniquities in your enemy's land. If you're saying that we can't keep the commandment because we're not in our homeland, right? You're going to have an issue trying to explain that portion in Leviticus 26, verse 39. That's going to be an issue for you. You understand? Brothers and sisters, the mindset that would say about the stubborn and rebellious son, well, if you can't do it, then, you can't do anything. Stay away from those energies and people. Stay away from that. You know why I encourage that? Because that be the spirit that would steal from you, lie to you, disrespect you, and because you can't, in this captivity, do judgment according to the way the Tanakh would have stated such, they feel they, quote, got away, so to speak. But they forgot that the Most High does judge, brothers and sisters. You understand? Some may have forgotten that the Most High does see and watch things. Now, earlier, right, I came down where I'm at. Well, I'm actually in the proximity of my daughter's mother's house basement where I'm doing this video when they're sleeping and resting, right? Brothers and sisters, the situation that was presented, and I say this not to be, quote, sexist, a woman of caliber knows her role and her position. One, it certainly is not to go back and forth with a man, back and forth, back and forth. After a while, you just have to say, you know what, sister, I don't even take you serious, and I'm going to keep it moving. It's been real. You see, you go to Proverbs 14, verse 7, if you will, right? Proverbs chapter 14, verse 7 says, go from the presence of a foolish man, for thou wilt not perceive the lips of knowledge. Brothers and sisters, you see, periodically I keep advertising this book. You know why? Because I wanted to go out there to the people. Same premise. When you find people who have to keep on saying when others are keeping the Shabbat, today ain't the Shabbat, today ain't the Shabbat, you can't sit there, you have no rest for the sole of your foot. And you misunderstood what Deuteronomy 28, verse 65 is talking about when it says no rest for the sole of your foot. That has absolutely nothing to do with you already creating a Facebook, already having an email, already having a phone to sit there and be online, to already having a Mac or a laptop, and so forth and so on, and sitting up there trying to tell people what we cannot do. When do you tell somebody what we should do to get up out of this captivity? And if you go back to Leviticus 26, when it says, if, brothers and sisters, Israel accepts the punishment of their iniquity in the lands of their captivity. How are you doing that when everything about you is a LOL and everything about you is a LMAO? You can't be taken serious at that point because, brothers and sisters, part of the condition of the physical book, this book here doesn't have an LOL in it. So that was that situation with that. Another thing to address, brothers and sisters, is this, right? And I want to read this particular aspect, if we will, right? We discussed about the aspect of whether or not 2019 is the said year for us to leave this captivity. So I asked the question again, and I asked the question again, and I asked the question again. And I'm going to ask the question again on this channel, right? I asked this. What will we say of the prophecy of Ezekiel 35 and 36 regarding Edom in the land? What will we say of the dry bones matter of Ezekiel 37? What would we say of the war to be in Ezekiel 38 and 39? There are many prophecies concerning Israel that has not come to pass yet for us to say this year on the calendar is the time of deliverance. What are the steps we are to take in this deliverance? What is the role we have as men in this? I want to stop right there. What is the role that we have as men in this to the brothers and sisters who are teaching, or to the brothers that's saying that 2019 must be the time of the 400-year captivity ending? Because this is April. We got 8 months left in this calendar year. If you think that the prophecies that we read of, such as Israel being sprinkled on with purified and clean water, the prophecies of going down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, the prophecies of the people standing upon their feet as their flesh consumes off themselves and their eyes in their sockets, as it says in Zechariah, the prophecy that says Egypt, the true Egyptians, coming to keep the Feast of Tabernacles in the future. The true Egyptians are not in their land as such. So when you read in Zechariah about the true house of Egypt, the true people of Simatawi, keeping the Feast of Tabernacles in the future, if you think all of that is going to happen in 8 months until January of 2019, 2020, sorry, you don't lost your mind. There are so many prophecies that is within the Old Testament, right? That if we're not careful, we can be labeled as a Nabi Shakwer, which means a false prophet, brothers and sisters. So let's continue. Malachi says the hearts of the fathers will be turned to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers. Whereas we see now, the broken homes among us is appalling. The matter regarding 1619, we addressed. Who were the captives brought by George Yardley? See, 1619, and that video can be put in the description as well, is when the British, brothers and sisters, recorded for their colony in what we call Virginia today about the aspect of slavery. Slavery already existed in the 1500s in the same area called North Carolina and South Carolina of today. So can we say, as some might say, the Israelites, pardon me, the people, the slaves, the Africans that were brought over to what we call North and South Carolina by the guy Vasquez alone in 1526. Some have purported the idea that those were not Israelites. Are we serious? People want to fit, if I'm following the logic right, 1619 so much to where the captives before that were said to not be Israelites, not realizing the people brought to Jamestown, Virginia in 1619 to the guy George Yardley, look him up in history, all right, were already captives in Brazil. The Dutch brought 20 blacks to Jamestown, Virginia in 1619 from Brazil who were already captives. These people were not just entering slavery, their slavery was being continued. Read some history. Read some history, brothers and sisters. We spoke on this previously on this channel, but I just want to ask this question here. Going to Genesis 15, and we're just going to read verse 16, right? Genesis 15, verse 16. And this is a question, brothers and sisters, to ask concerning this, because it's important. It says, and in the fourth generation, they shall come back here, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet full. Now, let's go, if we will, to the book of Amos in the scriptures. Amos chapter 2, brothers and sisters, so we can gain some understanding for edification purposes. And it reads as follows, right? Amos chapter 2, verse 9, addressing the Israelites, it says this: Yet destroyed I the Amorite before them, whose height was like the height of the cedars, and he was strong as the oaks. Yet I destroyed his fruit from above and his roots from beneath. It says right there that the Most High destroyed the Amorite by the time you get to the book of Amos. Amos was a prophet that was contemporary with the prophet Hosea that we read earlier. So my question, brothers and sisters, is this, one more time. In Genesis 15, verse 16, when it says the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet filled, who are the Amorites in 2019? Because if you're using Genesis 15 as a catalyst and a standpoint to sit there and state that is when we are to be delivered in this year, you have forgotten about the aspect of in the fourth generation, they will come back here. What are you talking about? Do you realize it's been more than 4 generations since 1619? And if you want to say that the generation, as some teach, represents 100 years, okay. We still have to answer the other question posed, such as the children of Esau in the land of Israel. Because Ezekiel chapter 25, from verses 12 to verse 14, it says that Edom will be judged by the hand of the Most High's people, Israel. Where is our army that it talks about going against the children of Edom? Where are the people that's going to be delegated when you go in Ezekiel 39 to search for a bone of a man when the Most High has already committed the act of judgment? Where are these people? Where is your prophet? Where is your leader? See, when you have a concept that would say, well, we can have a fair debate. Let's understand something. You don't debate this right here, the Tanakh. Pardon the cover, once again, I'm asking people. That's not to be debated. You don't debate the word of the Most High. You present the word of the Most High. One more time. You do not debate the word of the Most High. You present the word of the Most High. It says, blessed be he who published the word of the Most High. So we want to point this out for edification purposes. You are not fine when Assyria fell, the people debated when was their time. When Babylon fell, when was their time? They didn't debate that. The Most High was making moves and doing what the Most High does. As it says to the brothers and sisters who question me and ask, well, when do you count the time then? This is the time that we count, brothers and sisters. Well, when is the time that we count concerning to get up out of the land of captivity? We read it before. We're going to read it again because the counting was already established, right? And here it is, going right back to Deuteronomy 30, for those who understand where we're going in this particular regard, right? And it says the following, Deuteronomy chapter 30, so we can gain some understanding of what we're talking about. And it shall come to pass, that's the time it's talking about, when all these things are come upon you, Israel, the blessing and the curse, which I have set before thee, and thou shalt bethink thyself among all the nations, whither the Lord thy God hath driven thee, and shall return unto the Lord thy God to hearken to his voice, to all that I command thee this day. Now, brothers and sisters, that's the time set. See, when you find people trying to rush prophecy, well, without getting themselves right, they're going to rush themselves out of that deliverance. I want this to be understood. When you find people trying to rush prophecy while not working on their own selves, they will be forcing themselves out of that deliverance. You understand? So when you're saying, well, the time must be then, but you still have not worked on being a better father, like it says in Malachi, you still are not working on yourself as a better husband, or even trying to get a wife caliber. As a woman, you may not have sat there and worked on being a better mother. You may have had the spirit, not being sexist. This is my platform, and this is mine. And I don't understand. When you start talking me, my brothers and sisters, and certainly sisters, nobody wants to hear that all the time. Mine, this is mine. The earth belongs unto Yah, says the Most High, and reiterated by the prophet Moses to the Pharaoh. Kila Yehovah haaretz, for the earth belongs to the Most High. So when people start to always talk about me and mine and me and mine, know when to tone that down and humble that. That's something we have to all perhaps work on, brothers and sisters. That's something perhaps we all need to sit there and take. As I was told in my day when I was a teenager, to take what's called a humble piece of pie, brothers and sisters. So that stuff I wanted to talk about for edification purposes. There's so much work to be done. It's sad that people would misunderstand and teach a misunderstanding of Genesis chapter 15 without working on one's character to make himself or herself better. That's deep. That's real deep. When you're going to try to force them, oh, you said this will be the Most High did not deal with this Gregorian calendar that we're talking about. Well, 2019 is 400 years from 1619. We went over this before on this channel, all right? In part one called Israel Learned Your History, or Israel Learned Some History. We did an extensive presentation about that, but I just wanted to address that particular thing again because the questions that was asked was not answered. And if one wanted to have, quote, a debate or, quote, a fair debate, that's taking away time from me and my daughter. You must be crazy. See, to the people who say, brothers and sisters, right, that we can't do no law in the lands of captivity. You're wicked. Part of the law says, you shall diligently teach your children. That's part of the law, to teach your children. What are you teaching your children? LOL and laughing my ass off? That's what you're teaching? You're teaching them Facebook debates? You're teaching your children to be a better debater? Because the woman that raised me, may she rest in peace, she said it is better to leave an asset as opposed to a liability. Moses left an asset, Joshua, as the successor. And the leaders that came up in Israel after that were certain men of character. So if you saying, in one regard, one group, if you will, we can't do no commandments, then what are you going to do? What are you going to do? We explained again and again and again about the matter of the lands and Sabbaths. Because first off, not everybody can afford a land. See, this is what happens as stated when you're not thinking. When you try to figure out a way to wiggle out of keeping the commandments of the Most High, what does it say? The Most High turns wise men backwards and makes their knowledge foolish. So now you done forgot, oh snap, everybody couldn't afford a land. So if you're in the land of Gad, would you cross to Jordan to go into the land of Benjamin, where Jerusalem was? Brothers and sisters, that is the portion of the people who, not to be funny, is not thinking. That's why they stay among themselves, chat among themselves, and want to sit there and debate each and every single body else on earth, which is ridiculous. You're going to tell me that I'm wrong for wanting to have time and a day of rest? See, because the sacrifices were already ceased. When you go, for instance, in Jeremiah chapter 7. The sacrifices were by default at that time temporarily ceased. Yet we still read about them keeping the Shabbat 10 chapters later in Jeremiah 17. So, brothers and sisters, there is no wiggling out of the way of the Most High. That's why you find, brothers and sisters, when the question was asked about Leviticus 26, verse 39, to the community that says, well, we can't keep no law because we can't really do those judgments that the Lord talks about. So what is Leviticus 26, 39 talking about when it says your iniquities? If there's no law, what do you define what an iniquity is? Oh, I'm done. I bet you are. Shalom.